I'm Clifford Bates, and welcome to reading Carl Schmitt's Dictatorship. Today, we're looking at chapter one, which deals and it has part A and part B. We're looking at part A. Chapter one is the Commissary Dictatorship and State Theory, and A deals with state theory based on aspects and constitutional state theory. So this is why it's a Staattechnische. That's the technical aspect of Staat, in the state, right? And the Reichsstaat is, a constitutional state theory, literature. So therefore, this idea in German is that this state theory based on technical aspect. That's why that word is highlighted in the translation. So let's look at this in that sense. For the humanists of the Renaissance, and the concept of dictatorship was something they encountered in the study of Roman history and in their classic authors. The great philologists, who were so familiar with Roman antiquity, made their compilations from Cicero, Livy, Tacitus, Plutarch, Dionysius, Heraclitus, Suetonius, and so on. And in their various statements, they were only interested in this form of government as a topic in the study of classics. They made no attempt to explore the meaning in terms of the theory of constitutional law. And this is note one. He talks about here. Here is take account all the numerous significant works of Justus Lippius, which were also important for the political literature. Dominus Aenos, of course, he's talking about all the different authors that were during his time. They began the tradition of interpretation that, broadly speaking, remained unchanged until the 19th century. According to it, dictatorship was a wise invention of the Roman Republic, and the dictator was an extraordinary Roman magistrate introduced after the expulsion of the kings, so that a strong imperium, military power, right, may still be possible in times of insecurity. This imperium was not impaired, like the official powers of the councils, by their collegiality, by the rights of the people's tributes to veto, or by the right of appeal to the people, provoco ad populum, the citizen right in the archaic period to appeal to the popular assembly against certain civil sentences. Right, the dictator, who was appointed by the council at the Senate request, had the task of dissolving the dangerous situation by reason of which he had been nominated either by waging war, dictatura riga gerane, or by squashing an uproar from within, dictator seditionis sedandri. So therefore, these are two different criteria in Roman law of the dictators: war, external war, conflict, or there was a crisis in the warlike conference and security to say, or there was a chaos, riot, or some kind of sedition that needed to be crunched immediately. In later times, he could also be installed by some specific purpose, organizing a people assembly, contumus habendorum, having driving a nail, which for religious reason had to be carried out by the Praetor Maximus, Clevi Frigindae, chairing an investigation, determining the public fees, and the like. The dictator was nominated for 6 months, but whenever he accomplished his mission, he stepped down before his time of resignation, at least according to the commendable custom of the early Republican times. He was not bound by the law. He was kind of a king with absolute power of life and death. That's imperium, right? That's what imperium means, absolute power of life and death. There are divergent answers to the question whether or not the official power of the remaining magistrates came to an end through the appointment of the dictator. Usually, dictatorship was seen as a political instrument by which the patrician authority sought to save its dominion against democratic claims made by the plebeians. The historical critique of the surviving sources is not available. This is two again. Here, this is that following data, which is best literature of this. Right? He goes Livy, No, this is the filing date of this. This is Livy. He goes on here. Livy, find, concerning the Republican dictatorship of antiquity, it remains unclear whether the citation mentioned by Livy was that of this person, Emperor Arius, so that of that. And it seems, according by example bequeathed by the Annals, dictatorship was an internal political instrument for the battle against the Phoebians. And now this dictatorship has been understood by the political literature of the 17th and 18th century, but according to the recent analysis, it is likely that the older examples resort to dictatorship in order to put down rebellions. Right? This is his note. Here, I'm not going to go read it. It's very long. This is this 1, 2, the Roman thing, the quasi dictatorship, and the Senate Carteris point, and then he continues here with the third criteria. It's very long. And Sulla, the example of Sulla, right? So in 823, Sulla was appointed dictator of the Republic and dictator for forming of the Republic for an indefinite period on the basis of a specific law. Caesar was appointed dictator in 46 BC, initially for 1 year only. The mandate then was prolonged and finally extended for his lifetime. These dictatorships were not subject to the proventus, the right of appeal to the assembly, like the tribunate. They were not bound by the existing law. They only inherited the name of the old dictator. So this is the third criterion, right? That's it, right? So I'm not gonna, let's go back to here. The later dictatorships, Sulla and Caesar, although politically different from all previous dictatorships, in effectu terrenos, as Bisold says, were understood as identical in terms of a theory of state. So therefore, even though they were not, he wants to distinguish between the early republic, the dictatorship, and the early republic, versus then the later ones, which Sulla and Caesar emerged. That these were kind of different, these were politically different from those previous ones. But in terms of the theory of state, they kind of was, idea. This is the idea. The kind of state. This is the problem. Is the Roman political system a state, as Schmitt in German thinking aligns here? This is the Roman state. This is the scholarship of the 1920s and actually the 1880s, 1890s. There's this whole literature of this idea of the Grecian state, the Greek state. There's a famous book by Victor Amaro that deals with this question, and there's a Roman state also. So therefore, this applying of the concept of state to Greek and Rome, which was done at this time, and Schmitt seems to accept that this was. He doesn't challenge it; he accepts this view. Now Strauss and other people of this will say no, that the state is not that. In other words, this is a kind of anachronism. When you speak of a Roman state or a Greek state or even a Chinese state, these were political forms, but they weren't state forms. They were either a civitas, a pre-state form. They were political, and they had civic construction, but they weren't the same. In other words, the polis or the civitas was fundamentally at odds. And the empire that emerges, empires, tribal kings, empires, imperial rule, these are different in kind than the idea of the modern state. So therefore, Schmitt seems to assess that all political rule of sovereign rule is all rule that deals with sovereign, regardless of size, as a kind of state. And this is why he still kind of points this. This is why in state theory, this is not a big dispute. Because once you assume that state theory that states always were, this is the anachronistic construction of state, then it doesn't understand that this is there is a change that happens with the emergence of the state in basically 16th century, 16th centuries, then later post 16th century formulation of it. So let's continue. In particular, the obvious difference between the older Republican dictatorships and the later one of Sulla and Caesar might have suggested a much closer examination of the concept of dictatorship. The contradiction between commissary and sovereign dictatorship. This is the idea. This is a dictatorship between commissarial versus sovereign dictatorship, which must be developed in that what follows as fundamental as the fundamental deciding criteria is here already indicated by the political development itself. it resides in the nature of the matter. So this is, in other words, he says that the issue between these two is seen from the fundamental political question. So what is the commissary? The commissary, the idea of the original, the argument is that traditional form of Roman dictator was a commissarial. He was merely an officer that was done for certain emergencies. Whereas the later, like Sulla and this, was what we call a sovereign dictator. He was exercising actual sovereign power in itself, he says, right? That this is an interesting conception. I think that's what he's saying, which developed in what follows the fundamental criteria. It is the political development, right? The change of regime from the Respublica. In many ways, we have to remember that Sulla is trying to reestablish the Republica against the forces that were trying to undo it with Marsilius and the radical reforms and the popular forces trying to overturn the established the Republican order. Then Caesar doing so. Okay, this is that understanding here in that sense. So, but let's continue. But because the historical judgment is always dependent on the experience of its contemporary context, the 16th and 17th centuries were less interested in the development that led from democracy to Caesarism. Now, this is that question 3. This is from Mormon as well as Edward da Vinci about Caesar. This is basically notes about the scholarship of Caesarism and things like this. The absolute monarchy that emerged at the time did not find its legitimization in any consensus of the people. It saw itself as legitimized through God's grace. And it placed itself against the estates, which means in the context against the people. The linguistic importance of the word dictatorship, which led to its extension to all those cases in which one could say that an order is dictated. Dictator est quod dictat. The dictator is the one who dictates. Again, the deviation of the word dictator from dicre and dicere in the sense of giving orders. Listen, this is the Roman Glishist language, in essence. And then he says, according to Mormon in Stackright 1-2, the meaning of dicere was never of regre, to conduct, lead, or rule. Cato uses the word dictator, especially for commander-in-chief. For Mormon, that means that the dictator had no peer on the side. The Greeks, Polybius, Dionysius, Herodotus of Sicily, Plutarch, describes dictator as autocratic, por, P-O-R, self-ruling, crassy, with tokokrate, autokrate. They just leave it untranslated as dictator, right? See this on Liebstrom's. This is okay. See, this is the Vogue language, the language of the. I'm sorry, this is German. I don't know why it's going up. Administrative history, right? So, sorry, going to notes. I know it pisses you off. Dictator and the use of language that undoubtedly constituted the dissemination of the concept was not evident then. Okay, let's do 5. The reason for this, partly because the word dictator had a significant meaning in common parlance at the time. The dictator was a clerk, right? The consul, and the meaning of Gregory VII's famous dictate pape, papal edict, is the basis of this bureaucratic use of language. Okay. In the margins of the document in hand is noted Dictatus Pepe, that is dictated by the Pope. The staff member who had the duty of writing the document was called dictator. In constitutional law of the Holy Empire of the German nation, the word dictator was used to describe the specific procedure of the Reichstag, namely the assembly of legates and clerks, consuls. to whom the secretary of the Prince Elector of Mons had an elevated seat, dictated memorials, protest notes, and so on that presented the rule of the Reich. This is why decrees of the Commission, for instance, bear the top formula Dictator. So this is again, this is why the example here is that the administrative aspect of the Holy Roman Empire and this idea of decree, this idea that this has been a ruling or decree or statement from the one who has the right to dictate. So that's why this is, whenever in Germany the Roman juridical institution is compared to the national and political circumstances of the 16th century state, this is not in contrast to the examination that compares the legal status of the German kings with that of the Roman Caesar, or in contrast to any argument in canon law. Again, see note 6. Again, this is that, for example, see the comparison between Legis Cogno and the Roman proconsul drawn from Gemelius Draxum's Specerium Urus, or Latin text, a text, and that's dealing with the canon law, right? Arguments from canon law and exploitations of the concept of Roman institutions of the judicial development of concepts. Rather, it is, for the first instance, just a reinterpretation that, in its naivety, reminds us of the biblical and mystical images in which the event of the past reappear in the contemporary costume. So, therefore, this idea that Caesar and they use the word, and therefore, kind of reminds us of the biblical image of the past reappearing in contemporary dress, right? Nevertheless, their historical interpretations bear some fundamental significance. Accordingly, in the Strasbourg translation of Livy and Strasbourg translation of Livy in 1507, the consuls are called mayor. The Senate is called sometimes consul, and the dictator, if the word is translated at all, is called superior official, one who is the chief commander in war. And this is note 7, right? This is the Bernard Schauff's Roman history, right? In his German edition of Machiavelli Discourse, Schriftwell still translate consuls as mayor. Right? This is why the problem of the translation and the way translation was done, right? In his chronicle, Sebastian Frank emphasizes as the main characteristic of a dictator that he was nominated in times of great peril, and that he had supreme authority over life and death, without anyone being able to appeal against his judgments, and that he was superior to the Roman regiment, someone whose force and power was above the will of the Council of Senators. But the scholars of the political and constitutional theory of this century, in the scholars of the political and constitutional theories of this century, we already have some parallels between the Roman understanding of dictatorship and the subsequently internationalization in other states, which attempts, with different degrees of awareness, to develop dictatorship as a concept in the general theory of state. First of all, this is true of Machiavelli, who has to be mentioned here, although it can be said quite rightly that he never developed the theory of state. Now, this is the idea. In other words, this is a controversial Spinoza and Machiavelli, the Review of the National 1919. The argument is that Machiavelli himself doesn't really, and this is, I think this is, that he mentions a state, but really doesn't really define what the state really means. This is a good, Schmitt's criticism of Machiavelli is that he may coin, this is what the problem is, Machiavelli is the first person who really coins the concept of state as political entity. The use of the word stato as referring to the body politic, or the political form, or the political actor. But he never really develops a formal theory. Other people will develop that formal theory. Discussing the concept of dictator in general was imminent after the publications of Machiavelli's Discorsi on the Supremacy of 10 Books of Livy, right, which appeared 5 years after Machiavelli's death in 1532, because Livy's history, which was summarized in Discorsi, mentions numerous cases of dictatorship from the first century republic. It has often been denied that there is any originality in Machiavelli, and his writings have been described as an imitation of the ancient models. a compilation of the best bits taken from Aristotle and Polybius, or even the humanist dissertations. Right? This is George Ermer's this humanist idea. Right? This is the Machiavelli studies. Right? This is of the time. This Machiavelli was innovative here. Machiavelli does no innovation. It's only just repeating. It's the big bits. Nevertheless, his remarks on dictatorship display a profound and general interest in politics and a remarkable capacity for discernment. It is an old saying, reiterated many times, that the extraordinary conditions require extraordinary measures. But in Machiavelli's work, beside these common wisdoms, for example, his examination of the virtues, popular right up to the 19th century, of Roman Republican Romans who stepped down from the dictatorship before the end of their magistrates, Prince 1, chapters 30 and chapter 34. We also find remarks about the business of the ordinary officer whose complexity and dual mode of consulting would become dangerous in urgent cases and could make quick decisions impossible. This is especially true for the Republic. Dictatorship had to be a matter of survival, not because the dictator was not a tyrant and the dictatorship was not a form of absolute government, but rather an instrument to guarantee freedom, which was in the spirit of the Republican Constitution. Consequently, the Venetian Republic, which Machiavelli calls the best modern republic, which can find similar institutions, chapter 34, everything depends on how dictatorship was embedded in the constitutional guarantees. The dictator was defined as a man who, being independent from the influence of other institutions, was able to issue orders and execute them immediately, that is, without having to obey other legal remedies. Right? This is that line from the Italian text. A man who could deliberate without consulting and who could act on his deliberation without appeal, chapter 33. Machiavelli employs this distinction, which goes back to Aristotle, between coming to a decision and its execution, deliberatio and executio, deliberating, to define dictatorship. The dictator can deliberate per se stesso, deliberate on his own. He can take all measures without having to consult any advisory or executive body, right? Do anything without consultation. And he can immediately apply legal sanctions. But all these powers have to be distinguished from the legislative activity of the government. The dictator cannot change the laws, neither can he suspend the Constitution or the organs of office, the organization or the organization of office. He cannot make new laws. In a dictatorship, according to Machiavelli, the official administration subsists in a kind of control, or guardia, he says, control guardia, or guardianship. Therefore, dictatorship was a constitutional instrument for the Republic. The decembi, which the decembi were the people that they gave the power to, the 10 that they gave power to strike the laws, on the other hand, endangered the Republic through their unlimited legislative power, chapter 35. For Machiavelli, in the age that followed his own, dictatorship seemed to be an institution congenial to the free Roman Republic, so that people did not distinguish between the two types of dictatorship, the commissary and sovereign, and therefore they never regarded the absolute prince as a dictator. Later writers have sometimes labeled the prince portrayed by Machiavelli dictator, and the method of government illustrated in the prince dictatorship. This, however, runs entirely against Machiavelli's runs entirely against Machiavelli's conception. The dictator is always, admittedly, an extraordinary appointment, yet constitutionally a republican organ of the state. He is capitano, like the consul and other chiefs, Discourse 2, chapter 33. On the contrary, the prince is always sovereign. And Machiavelli's book of the same title tells us, basically, by presenting us with political recipes decorated with erudite political insights, how one can effectively remain in power as a prince. The tremendous success of the book rests on the fact that it corresponds to the concept of state predominant in 16th and 17th centuries, that is, the emergent nation state, and more precisely to a particular interest arising out of it, which leads directly to the question of the nature of dictatorship. Many discussions about the riddle of the prince are partly based on the contradictions in Machiavelli, who in the discourse appears to be a liberally minded Republican, but in the prince appears to be the advisor of absolute monarchy, and partly on his immoralities of the book. Either the contradictions, neither the contradictions nor the immoralities can be explained away by identifying them as a hidden attack on tyranny, or by understanding them as the suggestion of a desperate national. Right? This is 11. This is Albertus Gentilis, right? This is the famous Italian author who is he writes this, and Ceteris de Villis got the question of what Machiavelli really wanted and discussed in forms of the Academy. It is dealt with literature of this and Spinoza's perception of the Prince as a satire, right? This is these, and even Montesquieu, Spirit of the Laws. Of this, although Machiavelli had admiration for his ideal, the Duke of this, right? In other words, this is that idea. This is even, Now the other thing is the evidence of this argument is Mendel's this idea of a nationalist. This is that Machiavelli is the father of the new disparate nationalist, right? This is the two views. This is a Republican who's just arguing against tyranny. That's a Rousseauian kind of Spinozian argument. Gentili even argued that, and then the nationalist one. Nor can they be explained through discourses about the interest of power and pragmatic unity, which puts egoism above morality. This is number 13. On literature up to the 19th century, see von Moll's book, Literature of, by Machiavelli literature. On the history of the emphasis of the phrase Machiavellian. In fact, that's a very good book by Minke, right? Does he mention Minke? No, he doesn't mention Minke. And the catchphrase Machiavellianism. The quotation is taken from, again, these are different editions. So I'm not going to read the notes. Moreover, these accusations are completely void because a purely technical interest was dormant, which was, by the way, the characteristics of the Renaissance, and consequently, a member of the Italian artists pursued the technical rather than the aesthetic problems of the business. Even Machiavelli loved to preoccupy himself with technical problems, such as military and strategic ones, right? That's this is the thing of his book. This is what Martin Hammer talks about this, the art of war and things like that, right? This is evident even in the passage where he discusses diplomatic and political issues. For example, how one can be successful or how one does certain things. The most telling passages in the Prince are those where Machiavelli shows his true colors, that is, his hatred and dismissal of the dilettante, the inept character, that inept character in political life, who does things half-heartedly, with half-baked cruelty and half-baked virtue. Oh, I had to sneeze, so please forgive that. I stopped for a second. And consequently, about absolute technicity is an indifference that stands opposed to the further political purpose in the same way in which the technical engineer can have a purely technical interest in producing a thing without having an interest in its use. Things produced does not need to be any kind of interest for him. So this is a technical interest. This is a 15 note, which he took borrowed from the phrase of Raff. This is in his critique of the lawyers, which is about law, but not about political things. The consequence of absolute technicity is kind of problematic in this. Any political result, be it the absolute government of one single person or democratic republic, the political power of a prince, or the political freedom of a people, is just a task for the technician. The political organization of power and the technique for its maintenance and expansion differs according to the actual form of government. But the former always implies something that can be managed technically, just as the artist produces a piece of art according to his rational understanding. Depending on the concrete circumstances, geography, the character of the people, religious worldview, social power, and traditions, the methods differ, and the different constructions emerge. In the Republican discourse, Machiavelli praises the good instincts of the people. In The Prince, he alliterates that human beings are by nature evil, beast and mob. This attitude has been classified as anthropological pessimism, but theoretically it has a completely different meaning. In every discussion that seeks to justify political or satirical absolutism, the natural human inclination towards evil is postulated as an axiom in order to justify the authority of the state. And however different the theoretical interest of Luther, Hobbes, Bousset de Maistre, and Saul may have been, this argument appears significantly in all of them. Nevertheless, nevertheless, in The Prince, neither the moral nor juridical justification is examined, but rather the rational technique of political absolutism. So, in many ways, there is this idea that the focus of this is technique, the technique of power, technique of things. This is a technical, and I think this is how I should read the other passage. I kind of initially misread it. I thought he was criticizing this idea of law, pure law, but no. The political practitioners compared primarily with the political outcome, not in terms of outcome, but how it is to be achieved and how it's to be carried out, the technical aspect of it, right? This is that idea of the technical, regardless of the structure. Following a certain principle of construction, this view assumed that a human being had a particular moral deficiencies, which subjected him to this form of governance, on the ground that people who are endowed in their makeup with a republican principle, aiming for the common good, and who possess virtue, could not bear a monarchy. The kind of political energy expressed in virtue cannot be reconciled with forms of absolute government, but only a kind of republic. The human material that the technical procedure must reckon with must differ according to whether an absolute government or a republic has been established. It must differ, or else the intended outcomes would not be the same. So the people, their character, these things will determine certain kind of governments. Okay, if you have these kind of characters, then it's going to be impossible to have certain kind of governments, only other kind of governments, right? Such the technical understanding was the immediate significance, both for the origins of the modern state and the problem of the dictator. The rationality of this technology implied, first of all, that the constructing artist of the state viewed the masses of people that needed to be organized into a state as an object that had to be shaped like material by their will. According to the humanist belief in people, the uneducated masses, the vagarated animals, this is the many-colored beasts with many heads, right? As Plato calls it in Republic 9, 588c and Sophist 226a, there was something irrational that needed to be governed and led by reason. But if the people are irrational, then one cannot negotiate with them or forge contracts. Rather, they must be mastered through cunning or violence. In this case, reason cannot make itself evident. It does not argue, it dictates. The irrational is the only instrument of the rational. The irrational is the only instrument of the rational, because the rational can lead. The rational can really lead and act. And this is in accordance not only with the Aristotelian scholasticism. Again, this is St. Thomas Aquinas. He goes into the rule of this, of looking at Aquinas. I'm not going to go read the note. You go check it yourself. But with the Renaissance Platonism and the Stoic tradition, as well as all the moral understandings that dominated until the end of the 18th century. And those ideals of the Homer, Liber, and Sapien, the free and wise man. This was a man like Cato and Seneca, the wise, who was in charge of his drives and instincts through his rationality, and thus masters his affections, a sophisticated concept, directly opposed to the three representatives of mastery of affections, the great masses, women, and children. Okay, this is the masteries of affection, masses, women, and children. Rationality dictates. From scholasticism on, the phrase dictum rationalis, dictate judgment of reason, has been integrated with natural law. And this has also impacted on punishment and on any statute and any other statute with legal consequences. This is the idea of 19. The vast amount of literature follows us from Aquinas, right? Further the scholastics, then goes right to Hugo Grotius. Then it goes not only this to Duns Scotus, but then Scotus Suarez, Hugo Grotius, then Hobbes, Leviathan, then Locke, civil government, and then according to Adams and his history of the state, he goes that finding the word itself, in other words, as for Montesquieu and Rousseau, is the heart that dictates. Essentially, the word disintegrates itself. Everything, emotion, enthusiasm can dictate. For example, the use of the word positive law is this. This again, Schmitt's notes is sometimes good in their self, but I don't think I have the capacity to do it and the time. So let's go look next point. If the idea of a dictate was successful on the grounds of its rational superiority, at the same time it was independently and consequently of a pure technical interest, and the analysis of that, and in the analysis of that, it will always be apparent that the context of actions of a dictator consists in this: achieving a certain goal, accomplishing, the enemy should be defeated, the political opponent nullified or destroyed. So this goal must be accomplished, which is what? The enemies must be defeated, the political opponent nullified or destroyed. This always depends on specific circumstances. Because a concrete goal should be accomplished, the dictator has to intervene in the course of action through concrete means and has to do it directly. He acts. He is, to anticipate the definition, the commissar of action. He is the executive, in contrast to a mere decision-making process or judicial verdict, in contrast to the deliberé and consulting. In other words, he's not the consulting, he's not deliberating, he has to act, he must carry out. Hence, in the extreme case, he has the capacity not to obey general norms. But if the concrete means of achieving a concrete goal can, under normal circumstances, be predicted with regularity, for instance, when the police is entitled to maintain public security, in cases of emergency, we can only say this much: the dictator is entitled to do everything that is appropriate in the actual circumstances. Here we can no longer ask about legal considerations, only about the appropriate means that would lead to the concrete results in the concrete case. So in other words, for the police, there's regular circumstances and the police can do it. But the extraordinary circumstances, he must do what he must do to achieve what he must achieve. And that we have the legal law cannot bind that thing, because doing that thing is essential for the state's survival, the survival of the system. And so, concrete case. Of course, the decision and the proceedings may be right or wrong, but the way to judge these matters is only related to the question whether the means, in very technical sense, are appropriate or not. That is, whether they have achieved their goal. So therefore, that's again very technical. Did the means achieve their goal? That's the only way you can judge it. The means, the things we make, the decisions, the choices we made, right or wrong, but did the chosen means achieve their goal or not? If not, then you can condemn it. If they did, okay, this is the considering the considerations of opposing rights, the agreements concerning the obstruction of third parties, rights acquired through the normal channels or by hierarchical legal proceedings can hinder the matter. In other words, in a technical sense, they can be obnoxious and wrong. Therefore, especially in dictatorship, only the goal governs, which is free from restrictions imposed by the law and only determined by the need of the concrete situation. So this is the idea, the concrete situation. In other words, that these legal structures, these legal norms can be there, but they can impose. And they work in normal times, but in this terms of this crisis or this problem, they don't work. In principle, whenever there is an exclusively technical interest in the state and political matters, legal restrictions can be a hindrance and something inappropriate. And exactly in the same way, from the position of a purely technical understanding of the state, it does not make sense to have an unconditional value that is dependent from the intrinsic value of law. Right? This is, in other words, how can you, from a technical point of view, how can you, in other words, the position of purely technical understanding of state does not make sense to have an unconditional value as independent from an intrinsic value of law. Such a value has no interest in the law, but only in the expediency of the functions of the state. That is, in the sheer executive, which is not conditioned in advance of any by any norm in the legal sense. So the executive, the function doing it, is not determined by the norm in that sense. Apart from rationalism and pure technicality, we find here the third connection with dictatorship. Within the executive, the organ of execution must bow unconditionally to the interest of what is technically flawless process. One has to obey, even if not blindly, nevertheless immediately, not only what is preeminently executive, namely the military. The same goes for the execution of political judgment. And this is because carrying out the execution cannot depend on agreement of the executive officer, in the sense that he may be entitled to revise the revise the objective accuracy of the legally binding judgment. So therefore, in a sense, he may be entitled to revise the objective accuracy of the legally binding judgment of this executive officer. That's it. And outside the sphere of authoritative actions, to any well-functioning organization becomes impossible if the executive claims an autonomous right to contribute to or control on the basis of whatever interests are created by different standpoints from those of the technical functioning. So therefore, it becomes, in other words, if the decision maker has to be bound by external things outside technical functioning, then it becomes the outside sphere of authority becomes to any well-functioning, it becomes impossible, right? He says here. The simplest business of transport becomes impossible if the one who has to do the transportation takes any interest in what has to be transported, apart from the fact that it has to be transported. So therefore, the second in other words, I have to transport it, but I have an interest in it. I shouldn't have. I should just do my duty. If a postal worker checked the contents of the letter, then that would mean that technical organization of mail is used to achieve ends that are external to that organization. Such an action would necessarily contradict the technical perfection of the organization. In other words, within the functioning executive, one of the conditions process has been given. There is no longer any communication, any arrangement or consultation with the executive organs. Okay, I'm going to stop here for now. I have to take a break. I think this is an hour. I should stop. I'll find the page number and I'll just do that from there in part B. Okay, first half, second half. Okay, have any questions, comments, please put them below. If you have any concerns, I will look at them and respond when I see them. If you like the video, like it, hit the like column, hit the like, share it with a friend, share on social media. If you didn't like it, you can always put a note down like this. If you're not subscribed, subscribe. If you want to follow me, my links on social media link below, and also academic social media is below. If you want to contribute to help me do what I do, you can do so by becoming a member of Subscribe Star and Patreon links below. Or if you want to buy one of my books, you can find one of the books below. Well, this is going to be a quick one. I have to stop. Okay, I have someone supposed to be coming soon, and I got my warning right there. Well, take care, and I will continue this in part B because this is longer than I thought it would be. Okay, take care. Bye-bye.